Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 911. And today's date is March 6, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. The interview with Bo Polney has been uploaded to the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel, so you can go right over to X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel. You can view it there, or you can come over to the x22report.com site, scroll down a little bit, you'll see it on the right hand side, or you can go to the newssentinel.com site, scroll down, you'll see it on the right hand side. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, on Friday we talked about the jobs report. And the U.S. government central bankers are out there trying to convince us that everything is fine. They added about 55,000 jobs to retail. And if we go back in time, we've been tracking store closures. And of course, when those stores close down, people get laid off. We've been showing that a lot of people have been laying off in the corporate offices of these retail stores. And we see Staples has finally unveiled that it has laid off about 1,000 employees between November and January. And think about this for a second. During November, December, and January, this is the hot season for retail. This is the holiday season where they gain most of their income. And they were laying off during this time. Staples right now has closed about 73 stores in 2015. And they plan to close another 50 in 2016. And since 2014, they've closed a total number of 300 stores. And this is continuing throughout the retail matrix here. And what's happening is that all retail is contracting right now. We see from reports coming in, the retail sector, they're not any better than any other sector here in the U.S. And we've been looking at other sectors here in the U.S. We've been looking at manufacturing. We've been looking at housing, the auto industry. And all of this is declining. Right now, they're showing that a total earnings for the 496 S&P 500 members have reported results, and they are down negative 6.1%. So what we're looking at right now is everything is completely contracting, declining, falling apart. The economy is continually doing a lot worse. And as we go through this entire year, it's going to get worse and worse. Even though the president is out there patting himself on the back that we manipulated all these numbers. Look how great the economy's doing, and people are actually believing us. And he's patting himself on the back, showing all of this off. And what's going to happen is that all of this is going to crash. Now remember, they don't want to be blamed for this, because think about it. All this time they've been telling us how great this has been, how fantastic the economy's been doing. And they can't have it go down on their watch. They need to blame this on another group or another country. And this is exactly what they're going to do. Now, we see that they're still pushing a cashless society. Sweden right now has begun their 5-year countdown until it eliminates all cash, and we know they want to do this completely. But what's very interesting about what has been going on all around the world is they're trying to sustain this huge debt bubble. Now, it has grown very, very large. It's getting worse and worse. It cannot be sustained. And the central bankers realize this. They understand that as they go forward, it just can't work. And this is why Christine Lagarde was out there saying it would be great if we had a 10% wealth tax, not to pay down the debt, but just to let us continually keep moving forward, because they really don't want all the debt paid off, which is completely impossible anyhow, but they just want to lower it so they can continue and move forward and prop the system up for a little bit longer until they get everything in place to bring it down. And we see that they were trying a carbon tax to tax the people. And this is what happens during this time. They add more taxes. So the next part of their strategy is to basically extend the retirement ages. So if you're going to retire in 65, you won't be able to retire. If you want to retire in 70, you won't be able to retire. We don't know what the age will be, but we know they want to move it up. And the reason they want to do this is because they can tax you longer, and you have a shorter period of time in receiving those benefits. Think about what they're doing. Now, in Europe, we know that these refugees have been let loose into Europe from Turkey. Now, there's many different agendas associated with this. We know at this point they want to shut down the borders. They want to get rid of Schengen. Why? Because they don't want movement of capital. They want it contained in each one of these countries. And we can see this is exactly what they're trying to do at this point. So Lagarde is trying to alter the pension system by extending the productive life of each individual, and this will allow them to prop the system up because they're desperate at this point. They are looking everywhere to bring in more revenue to keep this system alive. Just a little longer until they can bring it down themselves and, of course, start a war to cover it all up. Now, out in Japan, we see things are heating up there. The people, the governor of Okinawa, they are speaking out. They're having protests, and they're saying, we do not want this base here whatsoever. Now, the U.S. came out saying we're a little delayed, but we're moving forward. Of course, they're not going to stop. Well, the Japanese Premier Abe, he said, okay, we're not going to build in Okinawa. We're going to suspend the construction. There is so much pressure on him that he says we're going to look to move the base to a different location where it's not so populated. So does this mean the base is not going to be built? No, it's just not going to be built in that area. They're going to move it to a different area. So the people hunkered down, they pushed, and they said, we do not want it here. Now, of course, all they're doing is picking a different location. And, of course, they need this base because they need it bigger, larger, more advanced to bring in more advanced weaponry to fight China, to fight Russia once war breaks out. Now, out in Kiev, we see Kiev is continually shelling the Lugansk area. They've done this in the last 24 hours, and they're continually doing this. And actually, this is increasing in intensity in this area because we know the Kiev government, they are pushing at this point to start a major offensive. They don't want to complete the Minsk II ceasefire agreement. Russia's putting pressure on Kiev. The U.S., Kiev, and the European nations are putting pressure on Russia. So we can see at this point, we're at a deadlock right now because we know Kiev, the U.S. government, they don't want to fulfill this whatsoever. Now, out in Saudi Arabia, things are deteriorating very, very quickly. The financial situation is a huge problem in the Saudi kingdom. Much of their budget has been burned up from that war in Yemen, and they're losing badly in this area. A lot of their black water mercenaries, they've been killed in missile attacks last month. The Yemeni rebels, they've captured their military bases 2 weeks ago within the Saudi territory. Last week, the Yemeni forces managed to capture over 100 Saudi soldiers. Saudi Arabia has a water crisis. And what they're doing right now is they're looking at the entire situation. The kingdom is falling apart. Financial situation is hurt because of the low oil prices. And now they're starting to tax water for the first time to bring in more revenue. And they need this war to go forward in Syria. They need Assad removed. They need the U.S. to come in and help out to remove these elected governments and put back the puppet governments. So we're going to have to watch this situation very, very closely to see what's going on as we move forward here because they're going to become desperate. Turkey is continually shelling into Syria. They have not stopped. They're keeping the corridor open. Of course, they're saying they're bombing the Kurds, they're bombing the Islamic State, and we know this is not really what they're doing. Now, Turkish activities in the region, they're undermining the ceasefire. And this is basically their job. This is what the U.S. wants them to do. Because the U.S. right now, they're pushing a new plan in this area. They know they are beat because Russia has been bombing the Islamic State, because we know in the past the U.S. was not bombing the Islamic State because it is their proxy army. This is why Obama was calling out the targets. They were specific targets, which were not the Islamic State. They were the infrastructure of Syria and Iraq. And we can see right now what they're doing. But very interestingly, there was a report that was leaked from NATO. And they basically said, okay, look, Russia is really hitting the Islamic State. And they've done this with fewer bombing runs, fewer warplanes compared to the coalition forces. Now, I know the corporate media, the U.S. government, the propaganda is out there. They tell a different story. Even NATO tells a different story. But they're watching the situation very closely. And this leaked report that came out shows that Russia is actually doing the work. Because when we look at this, the document points out that Russia deployed about 40 warplanes, performing about 75 sorties. And the U.S. and the coalition forces deployed about 180 warplanes against the Islamic State, and they were hitting 20 targets a day. Now we know most of these targets, almost all of them, were not the Islamic State. This is why we see the discrepancy right now. And the U.S. and the coalition forces, they know their beat right now. They know the plan they once had is not going to work. This is why Carter was going around to all these different countries during the ceasefire period, asking countries to bring in more military assets, more troops to fight the Islamic State, which makes no sense at this point because Russia and the Syrian armed forces have been doing the job. Now, why all of a sudden does the U.S. and the rest of the coalition forces need to bring in more into this territory when they couldn't do it for the last year? Well, we know the real reason, because they weren't really doing it. So are they going to really do it this time? No. They're going after Assad. They're making plans. They're using this as a cover story at this point. And they know the Islamic State is beat at this time. Now, we understand that Syria is going to call for elections, but Saudi Arabia is saying, listen, before the elections, before the transitional government, and they keep using these terms, that it's going to be a transitional government. Now, most likely they're going to try to force this, of course, but they want Assad to step down before the elections. Now, why would they want him to do this at this point? Because they know he will be reelected. This is what they're nervous about, and we know the elections are coming up next month. We know they're going to try to get rid of him and fix elections. They'll do whatever they have to try to get rid of him. But we see very interesting things happening during this period of time. Like we said, we've seen military assets coming in. We've seen troops from many different countries coming in. They've found weapons on a Turkish freighter. They found uniforms in Spain. And now we see the Syrian army in Swida, Syria, on the border of Jordan. The Syrian army confiscated a huge amount of weapons destined for the Islamic State. And they were Israeli weapons and U.S.-made weapons. They included 20 RPG shells, landmines, 90 anti-tank missiles, BKS machine gun boxes, and other ammunition. So we see they're still supplying the Islamic State. And they realize as Russia and the Syrian armed forces continues their bombing in the area against the Islamic State, not the rebel forces. Now think about this for a second. They're not going to be hitting the moderate rebels at this point. They're going after the Islamic State. So what the U.S. and the coalition forces are doing at this point is they're having the moderate rebels take over the areas where the Islamic State were. So the Syrian rebel fighters, they have now seized border crossings with Iraq and Syria. This way, the Russian forces, the Syrian armed forces, will not attack that area, and the U.S. can keep that under their control. So we see right now the Islamic State had controlled the Al-Tanf border crossing, and now the moderate rebels, they've taken that over. And we see this occurring all throughout Syria in different areas. Now, the U.S. is going to be using the B-52 Stratofortress bombers in the campaign to fight the Islamic State in Syria. This is what they're telling everyone. Now, is this exactly what they're doing? Why all of a sudden, if the Islamic State is beaten, all these towns and cities are liberated, Russia has been doing this since what is it, 4, 5, 6 months now? Why does the U.S. and the coalition forces need to ramp things up? They don't. Not for the Islamic State. They need to ramp things up for the next plan. So now they're bringing in more advanced weaponry, like the B-52, because they can drop 32-ton bombs simultaneously. And those are going to replace the Rockwell B-1 Lancer supersonic strategic bombers. Now, we have another report where Carter is out there saying that the HIMAR battery are being deployed in the Middle East right now. This is a multiple rocket launcher, and they're going to be used, of course, against the Islamic State. He added that the U.S.-led coalition is going to step up its cyber offensive against the terror group to disable their internet connections. So we see everything they're telling us is kind of a half-truth here. Cyber warfare is going to be on Syria. These new weapons coming in is going to be used for the next phase of the battle in Syria. Because if Assad stays in power, this whole thing is going to move forward. Because the U.S., the coalition forces, their goal has always been the same. Remove Assad. Put in a pipeline to supply Europe with natural gas. Place the dollar on the oil. Set up a central bank. And this is their path then into Iran. And this has not changed. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.